The numbers are in from the Texas primaries, and on the surface, the story seems straightforward. But if you're only looking at who won and who lost, you're missing the entire plot. The real story, the seismic shift that should have every strategist's phone blowing up, isn't about the names on the ballot. It's about the historic, record-shattering tsunami of Democratic voters who showed up and fundamentally altered the energy of this entire election cycle. Let's break it down with the cold, hard data. According to the Texas Secretary of State's office, early voting and Super Tuesday totals for the Democratic primary weren't just up. They were obliterating previous benchmarks. We're talking about turnout spikes in key suburban counties like Fort Bend, Williamson, and Collin that eclipsed 2020 numbers, a presidential election year, by double-digit percentages. In Harris County alone, a Democratic stronghold, over 200,000 votes were cast in the primary, a surge that local election officials called unprecedented for a midterm cycle. Meanwhile, initial analysis from the Texas Politics Project at UT Austin points to a Republican primary turnout that, while robust, largely tracked with expected engagement for a party with a heated gubernatorial contest. The contrast is the headline. The Democratic base isn't just awake, it's fired up, coordinated, and flooding the zone in the places that matter most. Now, the immediate Republican POV is going to be one of dismissal, maybe even a little gaslighting. They'll say, oh, it's just a primary, the real test is November. Or they'll point to their own raw vote totals and claim dominance. But that's missing the point in a spectacular way. This isn't about comparing the size of two separate rallies. This is about measuring momentum and intensity on a curve relative to a party's own historical performance. For Democrats to be posting numbers that look like a presidential year in what was supposed to be a brutal, red wave midterm environment, that's not an anomaly. That's a five-alarm fire for the GOP and a massive strategic advantage being handed to Democrats on a silver platter. It signals an electorate that is motivated, organized, and, crucially, not demoralized. A direct counter-narrative to the doom and gloom polling that's dominated the conversation for months. Think about the vibe shift this creates. For over a year, the political media narrative has been a relentless drumbeat of Democratic despair. Inflation, the president's approval ratings, stalled legislation, the impending midterm massacre. It's been a masterclass in lowering expectations. Then Texas happens. The headline number is this: over 1.4 million votes cast in the 2024 Democratic primary. Now, let's rewind the tape. In the 2008 primary, that's the Obama versus Clinton epic showdown that broke records everywhere, Texas Democrats saw about 2.8 million voters. A monster number, driven by once-in-a-generation excitement. Fast forward to the last midterm primary in 2022. That number was roughly 1 million. The historical average for a non-presidential year Democratic primary in Texas, it's been languishing well below that. So, 1.4 million in 2024, a midterm year, is sitting right in the middle of that spectrum. It's not at 2008's volcanic peak, but it's a staggering 40% jump from just 2 years ago, in a state that's supposed to be getting redder, not purpler. That's the first data point that should make your spidey sense tingle. This wasn't a surge contained to the usual blue hubs of Austin, Houston, and Dallas. We're talking substantial increases in the suburbs, the very suburbs that have been slowly, inexorably shifting away from the GOP for the last 3 cycles. Places like Fort Bend County, Williamson County, Denton County. The GOP turnout was basically flat, maybe even a little soft, compared to their own past midterm primaries. There was no corresponding red wave in the primary data, no massive mobilization. It was business as usual for a party that thinks it owns the state. Meanwhile, the Democrats just had their second highest primary turnout in the last 20 years, in a year with no presidential race on their ballot. Let that sink in. So what does tremendous actually mean for Texas politics? It means the Democratic base isn't asleep. It's not demoralized by national headlines. It's awake, it's activated, and it's showing up in force at the very first opportunity. It means the vaunted Texas GOP machine, for all its money and organization, is facing an enthusiasm gap that no amount of attack ads can easily fix. It means the fundamental math of Texas elections, where Republicans could historically rely on a massive turnout advantage from the jump, is being aggressively challenged. This primary energy is a loaded weapon. It gives Democratic candidates down the ballot a tangible boost, a clearer list of engaged voters, a volunteer base that's already warmed up, and, crucially, a narrative of momentum that helps with fundraising and morale. It forces Republican incumbents, even in supposedly safe seats, to start spending money and time on defense much earlier than they'd like. It changes the entire cost of doing business in Texas politics. But here's the cliffhanger, the million-dollar question hanging over all these beautiful, juicy numbers. Data doesn't lie, but can this primary energy actually flip Texas in November? So here's the POV shift. The contrast isn't just stark, it's the entire political narrative of 2024 playing out in real time, right here in Texas. While Democrats emerged with their nominees locked and loaded, ready to pivot straight to the general election, the Republican Party is staring down the barrel of a runoff chaos. The Democratic clarity versus the Republican runoff chaos is the single most important strategic development from Super Tuesday. One party has a clear battle plan, the other is still trying to figure out who's even on their team. This runoff chaos is a massive gift to Democratic challengers. Take the 28th Congressional District, for instance. Incumbent Henry Cuellar, a conservative Democrat, survived his primary challenge. That race is settled. But on the Republican side, they're headed to a brutal runoff between Jay Furman and Lázaro Garza. It's a structural advantage you can't buy. Now zoom out to the Senate map. All eyes are on Ted Cruz and Colin Allred. Allred won his primary outright, no drama. It's a distraction he absolutely cannot afford in what will be one of the closest, most expensive Senate races in the country. This is the national political landscape reflected in a Texas-shaped mirror. The Democratic Party, for all its famed internal disagreements, has become ruthlessly efficient at the mechanics of winning primaries and consolidating fast. They understand that, in the modern era, a prolonged primary is a strategic death sentence. The Republican Party, meanwhile, is still grappling with the civil war triggered in the Trump era. It's the establishment versus the hard-right MAGA faction versus the libertarians, a three-way brawl where the only common enemy seems to be each other. The runoff isn't just an electoral process, it's a symptom. It's the physical manifestation of a party that cannot agree on what it is or who it represents. And in a state that's trending purple, that indecision isn't political theater. It's an existential threat. So, to answer the million-dollar question from our cliffhanger, can this primary energy flip Texas? The data says maybe, but the strategy says the opportunity is wider open than anyone predicted, because Democrats aren't just running on their own energy. They're running against Republican chaos. They're running against a fractured opposition that can't get out of its own way. They're running with a unified front, while the other side is still picking its players in the middle of the game. The battlefield is set. The dynamics are clear. One party is united, the other is divided. The battle for Texas is officially on. So, let's wrap this thing up. Because after all that drama, all those numbers, and all that political theater, we need the final score. The key takeaways. The so what that tells us where Texas is really headed. And folks, the story isn't just in who won or lost a primary, it's in the turnout. That's the blueprint. That's the warning flare shot so high into the sky, you can see it from Mar-a-Lago to the halls of Congress. Here's the POV you need to walk away with. First, the turnout story isn't a blip. It's a 5-alarm fire for the GOP. We're talking about a nearly 20-point enthusiasm gap in a state that's supposed to be their fortress. Think about that. In the Republican primary, you had a sitting governor, Greg Abbott, spending millions to purge the party of his own members, creating an atmosphere of pure fear and litmus test politics. The result? A base that's smaller, angrier, and more fractured. They turned out to punish each other. Democrats turned out to build something. That's not a tactical difference. That's a fundamental, existential divergence in political health. One party is consolidating. The other is cannibalizing, and in a state where every single vote will matter this November, starting with a turnout deficit this massive is like showing up to a gunfight with a water pistol. It's a major, major warning sign that the Republican brand in Texas is in deep, deep trouble. Second, this is the Democrats' blueprint. They didn't just get lucky. This was a masterclass in coalition building. They mobilized the suburbs, the college-educated voters, the women, the independents who are exhausted by the chaos. They energized the cities, and critically, they are making a historic play for the Rio Grande Valley, not by taking those voters for granted, but by showing up, investing, and offering a unified front. They have a clear message: competence over chaos, unity over infighting. It's a simple, powerful contrast. While Republicans were gaslighting their own base about election integrity and hunting rhinos, Democrats were registering voters and running a disciplined, focused campaign. The primary proved the machine works. Now they have to prove it can work in a general election against the full force of the Republican apparatus. But they've been handed the playbook. The data is clear. The path is visible. All they have to do is execute. Finally, the biggest takeaway of all, Texas is no longer a monolith. It's a battleground. The era of assuming it's a red state is over. It's a purple state with a red tint, and that tint is fading fast. The primary was the stress test, and the Republican infrastructure showed cracks, deep structural cracks. The Democratic infrastructure showed it has the bolts tightened and the engine humming.